great to be here with you guys. I really appreciate everyone coming out. I like to do these talks with technical folks because we all can sort of sit and write code, but talking about ideas in business and how they all link together and how you can sort of build a culture in a business, I think is wildly important for people coming into the space, but also for people like current leaders and how you all sort of interact with each other. And so a bit of background on myself is I owned a web design company for small and medium businesses for about 9 years. I worked in transportation. I worked in manufacturing. Some of that is operational. Some of that's technical. And over the past, say, 6 years or so, I've been working in mostly technical roles. So I worked for Pluralsight, which is a platform as a service, and now I work for Elasticsearch, which is a SaaS software and an open source company. So I've sort of seen the gamut as far as like org structures, different problems in data, different types of sources of data, everything from now Elasticsearch, which is a vector data store, all the way to, just MySQL back when I was building websites. So I can kind of bring all of those things together nicely. And that's what I sort of hope to do tonight for you guys, to sort of give you the broader picture. So I did want to do a bit of an icebreaker. I stopped talking about myself, and I wanted to kind of get a raise of hands. And you can raise your hand on the Zoom chat as well. I want you to sort of raise your hand if you like AWS, if that's your preferred CSP. You got that too? Wow, okay. All right. How about Azure? Anybody? Two? All right. GCP? Okay. I've got some people who didn't raise their hands, a little bit non-committal. But that's okay. So the right answer was Azure, even though this isn't a test. But cool. So just to kind of get an overview of what I'm going to talk about is your org and the data Venn diagram is what I like to call it. So on the next slide, I'm going to show you an org chart as it's sort of like at a very high level. But I want you to sort of think of it in a compiled sort of way, right? So we have Python, which is an interpreted language. We have languages like Rust or C or these more esoteric languages that aren't used a lot in data. They're pre-compiled. They always come, data's already ready. You just kick the binary and it hits the metal, right? Taking this diagram, I want you to be able to take it back and compile the pieces of your organization as it fits within this wheelhouse. So when I show you this diagram, don't think too hard about it. I'm going to kind of walk through it step by step. And then I want to sort of talk about demystifying the culture of data. So on to sort of demystifying the culture of data. We all sort of use similar tools and similar patterns, but I think we sort of approach the problem in a way in which is fundamentally getting the cart before the horse. So I'm going to talk about a bit about culture, and then I'm also going to talk about getting this thing out of my face.
Slide it all the way up or minimum.
Yeah. So is that better? That's off. It's still pretty awful, isn't it? Should be able to minimize this thing. If that's not getting in anybody's way, we can close it. All this stuff on my screen here. So go back a bit. All right. So then I'm going to talk about a bit about synergy and how to get there, like how to actually get this implemented in your organization, start building a culture, and actually make this meaningful to any size organization. So let's talk about the data org and the data Venn diagram. Most people thought I was going to talk about the things that were in the initial slide: business intelligence, data science, master data, AI, ML, and then all of the ops and DevOps teams that sort of are attached to those now to support the infrastructure. But I really wanted to go a bit higher and to sort of talk about each of these roles and how they relate to sort of domains in your business and why they're important. And some of these will map to your business, some of these won't. But if they don't, they are core competencies of any business. And if you need to find information about them, knowing where to look is good, but knowing the function is even better because you can go dig up where it's at. Because some businesses have non-traditional, sort of structures, especially if they're startups. I work for one. Elasticsearch is a $1 billion company, but we're barely 10 years old at this point. And we have a lot of immaturity when it comes to these sort of things, not like the manufacturer that I work for that's been around since the 1970s has this very flattened out. So let's talk about the CTO in that role, the Chief Technology Officer. A lot of times these roles will sort of get mixed with the CIO at a lot of companies, and they're like, oh, Salesforce is technology we use, but Salesforce is an information system. It's fundamentally information you use to drive like business decisions. So that's sort of where the lines are drawn. So CTO, infra ops, keeping the lights on, keeping your laptop working, keeping the internet on, keeping your VPN working and access into secure resources, ITSM, helping you fix the stuff like we fixed today for the meeting, keeping you moving every day. And then IT PMO is sort of like the group that's going to work between the COE, which I'll explain what the COE is in a minute, and sort of like your other functional business groups to implement technology. So say you're bringing on a new CRM, a new ERP, going from SAP to Dynamics, whatever that looks like. IT PMO is going to be leading the charge, taking information from the domain stakeholders and then working with the technologists to actually implement that technology. So they're very vital, and they're sort of the point in the business in which information starts getting generated. So it's a really important point. And when you're a data professional and you're sort of trying to dig up information in your business and like build these data sets, build domain knowledge, like that's where the pipeline starts. So if you're talking about marketing and sales, that's top of funnel. That's where everything begins and everything sort of flows downstream from there. They're going to put your ERP in place. They're going to set your initial data hierarchies. So like master data, they're going to, that's how your data is going to be shaped, how you bucket it, your dimensions in your data. All that's going to be implemented in that initial IT PMO phase, right? And so then you have the CIO, which I mentioned, information. So Chief Information Officer is very, very important. The COE is a sort of a colloquial term that a lot of big organizations use. But basically, it's the folks who sit every day behind a Salesforce, behind an ERP like SAP, behind any other edge applications it's going to take to run your business every single day. They're the ones adminning it, putting in constraints. They're getting hit with, whatever governance is required on top of the data that's in your company. The same governance that we put inside the database, they're the ones who define that with IT PMO when they install an application. Say, hey, this is GDPR because we operate in Canada. This has different governance. All that's going to be sort of figured out by the COE and maintained by the COE. So if you need to understand your data, you need to go to the COE. You need to go to the people who run the applications to get understanding where the data is, how to get the data out. They're going to be the technical resource. And then on the other side of the CIO is what's called GBS, or Global Business Services, which is basically a model of sort of consolidating AR, AP, cost accounting, and master data management. And so a little bit further down the funnel, and this is going to make more sense here in a while. I know this is a bit esoteric, but it's important to know where to find the data in your business and actually go leverage it. So once you've got all of the hierarchies defined and you're starting to build people, you're starting to make money, now it's time to start reporting. Data and analytics is will be the next bucket, but that falls traditionally under the CFO. Because everyone knows reporting the dollars and cents is the most important thing to most businesses. Then other analytics sort of come after that. You enrich that data with, say, your edge applications to improve processes and those sort of things. But the initial lift of data and analytics is often finance related. Finance or sales, one of the two. So they often fall under finance, right? And then you have FP&A, financial planning and analysis. They do a lot of the planning and digging around in the data for the average user to say, hey, I'm trying to make a budget decision in the business. Like, do I need to buy? How much money can I spend? What's the value of that thing, that initiative we're trying to do? They'll help you sort of vet that out. There's professionals just in the business who are going to sit out there and analyze everything you do, value, give you hard dollars and cents, soft dollars and cents, and say, does this make business sense? Leverage those people in your business. They're very, very important. They set the budgets every year. So make friends with them, have coffee with them, be friends with them. And then the rest of this is a bit just for show is tax, treasury, and asset management. And then if you're in a publicly traded company, you're gonna have investor relations. Some of you may have noticed there was one function where there's two things on here that are missing, and that's the COO, Chief Operating Officer. That's going to be something that's specific to your business alone. You're gonna have to know and understand your business. This is where you're going to go find that data about that domain. If you're working in a manufacturer, you're obviously going to have manufacturing like systems data coming off the plant. If you're working at any company, the way you run your business, the operation of the business, you're going to have systems that sort of support that. And you'll have to get that and combine that with your ERP and your CRM and your systems management data that you have in your business. And the other person I have not mentioned on this slide is obviously data science, because let's be honest, they're everywhere in this entire picture in these days. So you're sort of embedded, but I'll get to why that's important. And those folks need to understand all of this domain in order to be successful. So let's talk about data culture. I was a BI person once, just needed some data, got thrown in. Here's 4 tickets. We need this report done. We need this thing accomplished. And I'm like, all right, architect, where's the data at? And they're like, they point me to the raw table of data, and I go spend 3 weeks trying to figure out what the heck is going on. Like, don't understand the data, don't understand the dimension. There's no clear taxonomy or naming conventions or any of that sort of stuff. So I just pull everything into Power BI or everything into my reporting tool, and I just start chomping away, just going to town. And I spend 3 weeks delivering nothing to anyone that's of value, that is not insightful, and will most likely barely be viewed by anyone. That's sort of the first year of BI that I spent doing that. And I sort of stopped, and I was like, I have to find a better way to deliver on the insights, because I know they're there. They're in the data. There's something relevant that we can gain from this. I'm getting all these requests. People have questions. So I had to sort of stop and start focusing on solving an individual problem rather than trying to make this big, huge, expansive thing every single time. It's like, let me have 7 slides and tell a story and, all these sort of buzzwordy sort of things. And I'll get to buzzwords and abstraction here in a second, but you often end up adopting solutions rather than actually designing a solution, right? And I'll give you a really core example of how somebody designed a solution that was very simple, but it was super impactful. And so I'm sure you guys have heard of WhatsApp. A guy named Jan Kama, I always forget it, I always pronounce his last name wrong. He applied for Facebook and they rejected him. Yeah. So he said, I'm going to start my own company. He saw the traction in the market. Hey, there's this app store. I can make something impactful. He set off and made WhatsApp, him and one other developer. By the time they sold that company to Google, they only had 32 developers for $19 billion. 32 engineers built WhatsApp. And what they did was, instead of saying, here's how everyone else is building a messaging service, they took an esoteric language like Erlang, which I'm sure some of you probably never even heard of, because I hadn't until I heard about Jan like 4 years ago. Took a framework of an operating system called BSD, which is very similar to Linux, built a messaging service that was 124 kilobytes. So they built that from scratch to design a simple purpose and to solve one problem. This is the thing I'm solving for. This is the thing I'm going to fix. This is my output. So they got rid of all the bloat, all the feature creep, and they said, on first principles, I'm going to design something that's scalable. And so today, if you go and search daily messages on WhatsApp, they're using the exact same infrastructure and technology they designed back in, I think it was 2015. And they're serving 100 billion messages a day. I don't think, and that sounds like, yeah, it's a lot of messages, but think of asynchronously serving 1,500 messages a millisecond. That's how much they're serving up right now. And they did it by first principles. Hey, I have a problem. I'm going to define that problem. I'm going to go do the work of finding that domain knowledge and that information, and then I'm going to solve that problem, and I'm going to move on to the next one. I don't let the feature and the bloat and we often in the data where we're like, oh, there's this fancy sort of shiny thing out there. It's like, no, we want to solve problems that deliver value. So let's focus on designing solutions rather than adopting solutions. So oftentimes you get that nice piece of $500,000 software in your door for your company, and it stays around for way too long, and it's only doing 80% of what it needs to do. And you said, oh, I'm buying this extra feature because we could use that. And you end up wasting a lot of time and a lot of energy trying tools that aren't actually solving your problems. They're building up tech debt and making you hire more people that aren't actually solving anything for you. So I think that's a really big thing in the data space. It's like, we want to be business focused, yes, but having an engineering mindset when you're trying to solve problems is going to get you much further, and you're going to waste way less time, and you're going to be way more valuable things for your company when it comes to data. Don't be afraid to get in the technical and actually do the digging. Those people who sold $19 billion companies, they spent day and night finding that solution and were dialed in on it. And they didn't get distracted by, adopting some platform that somebody else was successful on. They found a way to deliver on what they were intentionally delivering on, which sort of leads me into sort of buzzwords. I really hate buzzwords. I'm not a big fan of them. Often they're just an abstraction away from a problem that's actually there for you to identify and fix. So I sort of pulled up some buzzwords off the internet when I was writing this. So data trash is I guess, a colloquial term in 2023 that people like to use. But basically the meaning of it is we didn't keep our data warehouse clean. We put a bunch of data in there, we integrate new data, we don't clean up the old data. Data we transformed for some other report, just still hanging out in there, running every day. They call that data trash. I call that bad process management. That's not a colloquial thing you can just say, hey, this is just data trash. We have to find a way to fix it. It's like, no, you have to go a level below that and find the actual problem. And it's a process problem. You need to understand how to maintain state in your database. And I have another example of this really quickly. We use DBT where I work. This is our actual production code base. We use Terraform for all of our infrastructure, which manages state. And I said, I need the thing in Terraform that manages all my infrastructure, manages my schemas, my accesses, my we use GCP, unfortunately, my GCS buckets, my Cloud Run instances, whatever's doing my compute, my pub sub, doing event-driven data loading, all of those things. But DBT isn't cleaning up after itself. So I went and wrote a macro that goes and scrapes, BigQuery, the information schema, takes my manifest.json that generates my schema in DBT. And I said, hey, if there is a object that's in my database that's not in my DBT configuration, I generate a drop state for it and I drop it. So every time a production run happens, automated build of production, the next step is a third step because we rebuild dev and test, and then we garbage collect, clean everything up. And so instead of saying, hey, I'm going to adopt some sort of stupid process of I'm going to put a thing in my Jira sprint every 2 weeks to go and analyze what's in my database, automate it out of your life and build a good process around it, and you don't have to worry about data trash. So these are the sort of things that I mention when I don't love the idea of these colloquial terms, because they sort of get in the way of you actually identifying real problems. Data fabric, data mesh. This is a whole idea of you need to be able to share assets to each other. You need to have this very, sort of blanket coverage across your organization of using assets, sharing assets, which is that's a great thing to do. But it's just called building a data platform. It's not called data mesh. It's called understanding your using base and building something purpose driven to them. So you need to drop down below that and figure out velocity, getting your data in, access management, enablement. That's a big thing people in the data space miss, is enablement. This comes from my IT days. It's how do I get somebody who's very untechnical into this ecosystem and working very quickly? Enablement always needs to be part of the strategy, because you're always going to have that worksheet, that spreadsheet junkie, around. You need to enable them quickly and give them data, hand them taxonomy, and they're going to run off and do all the great things because they're very smart and they can do all the VBA they want to do on their own out of my hair, right? So data contracts is another one that people like to talk about. This is very, very much I've heard this a lot this year. It's the idea of change management. If you have a data contract with, say, a person in the CRM team, if that thing changes in the CRM, people downstream need to be in the know and write off on that. And needs to be some change management. That's terrible for velocity. That is awful for actually delivering anything, because you're gonna have to go through 7 layers of hell to try to get to actually delivering that new feature, which Salesforce just wants to update their territories. And you're hold on, we've got all these joins on territory and we've adopted all these means and things around our data. What that means is you're not listening to your business when they need to change. We have tests in DBT to stop things, and we allow them to change, and we react. We're the ones sort of leaning on the business always. We're always downstream of them. It's not a handshake. Business and life isn't that clean. You spend more time writing that stupid contract and maintaining it than you actually do delivering features. This is just called over processing, overdoing it in your processes every single day. So these buzzwords and these abstractions are all really just process things. You need to drop down, find out where those pieces fit, target them, fix them with first principles, and move to the next thing so you can continue delivering value. And I have 6 core primary tenets that I sort of lean on when I'm thinking about how I approach some sort of solution. And I'll share those guys at the last slide with you. But you can do that with any problem. They're fundamental to any problem you're going to solve, whether you're a plumber, whether you're an engineer designing WhatsApp, or whether You're some guy like me who works in databases and writes sloppy Jinja in DBT. So let's talk about how this actually fits inside of a business. This is another colloquial thing I don't like to hear is cross-functional teams. I really hate the idea of this. And this is a hot take, I'll be honest with you. Lots of people love to hear cross-functionality and you're working together and this is whole sort of synergy thing. I work for Elastic. That's the team I work for. That's not the teams I work with every day. I work for Elastic. So when I'm making decisions, I'm making them to affect every user group. I'm not making them to affect the person that's on the call who may or may not affect my paycheck. I'm making them for the person, for the business that I work for. That's cross-functional, right? And I'll get to why that's important. But having a unified platform across your entire company, no data mesh, you don't really need data mesh. You need clear understanding of what your governance and access strategy is based on the upstream in your ERP, in your CRM systems. You apply those. You don't create those yourselves. You let the business decide what that means. You let the lawyers who make millions of dollars decide what restrictions and things you put in governance you put in your data. You don't decide that. As data people, we should not be the ones approving access. We should be the ones applying and stewarding access. And that goes back to that enablement thing. Taxonomy and naming conventions. Our data governance team wanted to put a description on every single schema in our BigQuery. And I said, absolutely not. We're not going to do that. Because I look at a schema one time. I look at all the tables and views inside of there many, many times. I need a naming convention inside of my taxonomy, inside of my database. So when you look at that schema name, it's consistent and you know exactly what's in it the moment you look at it. And it's simple and easy to understand. Again, the fundamental problem was that we didn't have a good taxonomy. We were just naming stuff however we felt it needed to be named. And I spent 3 months going around team to team, friends of mine that work in data, and finally nailed this down. Took me another 3 months to move everybody off the old data sets. But since I had DBT and a lot of automation, we were able to spin up UAT, have people start hooking to it, and completely migrate off of one BigQuery to another with 500 plus users because we had clear processes, clear naming conventions, people could understand what was going on. And these are things that you don't need documentation for. I think that's another thing is like, it's great to have artifacts laying around all the time, but once you get past that first page of Markdown, you've lost a lot of people, to be quite honest with you. So taxonomy and naming conventions are just brutally important. It's just like a branding for a business. When you see that big G on the wall, you know it's Google. When you see that thing in the database, you know it's sales data. You know it's whatever that thing is. So think of taxonomy in your naming conventions as almost like your branding inside your database. People should recognize them at first glance. Shared assets. Of course, I talked about DBT and Terraform. We have sort of intermingled those two tools inside one repo at this point. So anybody who's writing SQL in a DBT model can see the access on the data set they're writing into and the access on the data sets they don't have access to. They can see the SQL going on in the data sets they don't have access to. Therefore, they can go and put a request in and say, hey, can I be added to this user group that's on that schema because this data is relevant for my job? Approver approves, automatically do the pull request. I never write a bit of code because it's in there right where they're working, right? So having that shared sense of like management across all of your teams who work in the data space generates this sort of ecosystem of like, oh, I don't have to wait. I can go do it myself. I can go deliver this thing myself. And I can explain to them how to do that PR in probably 4 sentences inside of a document. It's very simple. Copy and paste, add your name to the list, open the PR, approver, merge, automation, right? This reduces all the friction from actually like getting people in the database and actually using the data. And so everyone likes to say continuous integration, continuous deployment. I say continuous knowledge intake and continuous knowledge transfer. If you're on a call with someone in the business trying to map out this thing right here, you're trading information all the time. Always be in like active listening mode when you're in those conversations and saying, hey, I understand that. Here's how I'm sort of seeing it. Throwing spaghetti against the wall, working out those things. And then when you have tools like DBT, you can document that right there in your logic for the next person who's going to be coming and using that. So let's talk about master data. Right? They build the foundation. They define the data. They tell everyone what it means. They test and say, we're going to change this hierarchy for the next business year based on this business case. Right? They're doing the job of managing your data. You need to be best friends with master data, to be quite honest with you. If your company doesn't have master data, they need to get it. Because like if you're not managing the data within your ERP systems, all of those 500 user people in my company would just be pulling their hair out every single day because there's no clear meaning of what your data is, how it's actually been, and how it make it accessible for people. That's a BI person. When you're coming to like data science and you're trying to build a feature set, you don't really understand like what the data means, and you just have this wide table of features because you don't understand. You're just like, let's just test it all and see what's good. You know, you don't have the clear understanding. Again, it becomes like velocity, scalability. You're using less resources to do the same jobs. All of these sort of feed into these primary tenets right here. So whether it comes from a business person, an analyst using data, a data architect like me trying to deliver solutions to people and processes that are scalable, you have to sort of can take in all of these things: velocity, scalability, stability, uptime, accessibility. People can actually get to it and understand it. Enablement. The tools are well known, open source, non-proprietary. And then security is obviously a huge thing. Everyone wants to have their data be trusted. And that's these primary tenets let you build trust and let you build better every single day. So again, go back to that idea of fundamentally solving problems. Use that to enable these functions inside your business, and you'll be able to build better things for your business more quickly with less tech debt, and be able to repeat that over and over and over again so you can move on to those really hard problems that you would spend months and months working on, like building a WhatsApp that could serve 1,500 messages every millisecond, right? That's how you get to that sort of output. Luckily, Jan had a clean slate. We often don't when we're in business. But if you go and you start building on those first principles, you'll see a hive mind of people come and start working and say, oh, this is easy. All you have to do is enable people, and they will come to where, you bring the honey, the bees will show up. You don't have to like do the opposite, right? Just build it and they will show up and come and work inside this ecosystem. So just being the person who sets the standard and builds things that are valuable will bring people into your ecosystem. You don't have to prove anything. Let the value of the things you do, show themselves. You don't have to sit and give a sales pitch. I'm kind of a jerk sometimes. I'm not really always great at giving a sales pitch. I get pissed off and I say something stupid, right? Let the value of that thing you're building be the thing that drives the culture in the business, right? So foundational ideas of delivering things in a repeatable way will help you gain trust, build faster, build better, and just all in all make you a more happy person because you're going to be delivering things. Like, I hate like trudging through 3 months of never delivering anything in my business. Like I really care about moving the needle. Like it's something that's important to me because it affects the other parts of my lives. Like sending my kids to college. Like there's lots of things like altruistically that breeds in someone. I have 4 children, well, 3 and 1 on the way. And like, that's why I go do it every day, is to affect those people around me and the people that I love. And so when you're able to build things very quickly and deliver value, it enriches the rest of your life. So find ways to build things foundationally. Don't over architect things. Narrow your focus, put the blinders on, and build trust and build things better. So that's all I got.
Yeah. A lot. Curious, are there other questions for Matthew? Yes.
What's your take on
No, you're fine. I'll sit back here. Excuse me.
your thinker for the presentation?
Yeah.
Great. And I wonder, what are your take on buying versus building approach?
So I lean towards build because I'm an engineer, but I'm biased about that. There are times where a platform is going to enable you to do things very quickly. I think it's just very important to know when you onboard a buy that you target the actual, the actual features within that thing you buy, and don't overpay for the rest of the product. Say, I'm buying it for these things. I'm buying to solve these things. That's what we're going to use it for, and know the other pieces that fit around it and how they fit before you just kind of jump in the water. I see this happen with a lot of tools, like Alteryx is a really good example. It's the sort of the Swiss Army knife, but it's awful when it comes to like tech debt, because you just get random people in there. It's like, hey, dude, we can do this now. We can do this now. And they just build all this stuff that's really not scalable or useful. And you adapt, or you take on like, the platform rather than like designing a solution within the platform to solve something. So you adopt rather than design. And that's sort of where you end up paying way too much. Like we bought Alteryx and I used it to basically extract and load when I was using it 6 years ago in my first BI role. And then they gave it to the FP&A folks, and they're doing all this wild stuff with it. And we're like, that's not what you bought it for, we're not supporting that. We can't, that's not the thing we're using it for. So you have to sort of know where to draw those clear lines and set some governance over that product rather than saying, hey, we're just buying it and use it how you want because we paid for it already. That's poor strategy. It's poor process management. But I do lean a bit towards build, especially in the ecosystem we live in. I work for an open source company, and so I'm very biased towards FOSS and towards open source technologies. When you build them out in the public, and they become way more meaningful when so many more people are building ideas into them. So I do lean towards non-proprietary first, committing to that code base, helping build that thing that may not be all the way there for you, and start sort of fostering the community around it, just like here in the data team. But there's always going to be scenarios where you need to buy for sure. So, good question. Anybody else?
Questions or online?
No, but
Yeah, so with all the involved entities, they're going on a carrot stick.
Huh?
Right, so who ends up usually being the biggest proponent, who usually ends up being the most resistant? Trying to move the process.
So that's a good question. So the carrot and the stick is often, like somebody in a domain area trying to deliver something like, hey, Adam, if we use this technology, where we can get more sales, or we can increase our, conversion in the funnel and marketing, or whatever that sort of thing is. And the way I really handle that situation internally, like interpersonally, is probably a better way to kind of think about it. As I mentioned, FP&A in every single business, there's a group who sort of sets the standard. So I will take every big project we have like that. I get with the stakeholders, we line out all the hard savings, soft savings, sort of give it a first pass. I hand that to FP&A and say, go do the dirty work of actually taking in the data and verifying this for me against our financial planning. And the way that the executives look at the business, I have my 3 projects, marketing and sales, and say we have a engineering or product team that needs something as well. I rank order them, most valuable to least valuable. And I go back to the stakeholders and I say, I'm working on your project. We've committed 3 sprints to it. You guys were second. If you think there's more value on the table, like, let's go back, but we have to clear that through FP&A. So I take an unbiased party and sort of bring them into the mix to sort of manage that relationship rather than saying, hey, I like you sales, or hey, I like you marketing. That's often how people take it when you deny them the thing they're asking for. It's like, no, I'm really just on Team Elastic. And that's where I mentioned earlier on this cross functionality often kind of gets you in trouble when you don't have an objective third party to actually like arbitrate, like what's going on. So often I will pull FP&A in and make them my best friends, And when you start speaking that language of the business, you often have a seat at the table with the executives when it comes to making decisions because we're talking like the business, right? So, good question. Yeah.
then if their own community make it more efficient than their own group or embedded in
You didn't catch the first part of that.
so in the org chart, you got data and what it's their own group,
Mhm.
think it's more efficient for them to be in their own group or embedded, like my need embedded thing, different group. Okay.
So this is a fantastic question because I'm going through this right now. Pluralsight and Louisiana Pacific were the 2 companies I worked for before Elastic had consolidated data teams. We were very successful in delivering a clear message to the business. Now I work in a company with 2,000 software engineers and embedded analytics teams everywhere. And it has been extremely tough to sort of herd cats with these disparate teams because there's no clear leadership, right? There's a CFO sort of asking his financial, reporting team to give him something, and then this person has their one. You have that carrot and the stick, and you don't have any clear, like, way to sort of ascertain whose thing is the most valuable because each person has their own thing already. And it's been very, very difficult. The way we were able to solve for that was through DBT. So on our internal team, because I was, as of today, and nested in the finance and the actual like FinOps team. But I got moved over into enterprise architecture today. So that was fun. But basically, we got what looks good, like what's the best you can build in our group. And we got it working. We got humming very, very, very good. I called it DBT 1.0 when we launched it because it was like, moving away from this monolithic BigQuery project and moving into a dev test prod and like really clean, clear processes with a taxonomy. And then I sort of took that around and shopped it to the security team, the observability team, the other groups, the HR analytics team, and said, hey, these things benefit you. So I sort of had to build it and then go get around those other teams. And now we're all sort of starting to work in the same DBT project, which has been really, really good because like the marketing person comes in and they've been maintaining a bunch of case statements and coalesce statements in their SQL to fix some sort of thing in the data. And they're like, oh, the salespeople solved this already. And they have an initiative to fix the data in the source system. Why am I wasting my time doing this? So we're starting to see that interplay across different groups, but man, it was a pain in the rear end to get those different disparate analytics teams sort of moving in the right direction without top down, like CEO level sort of vision to make that thing happen. It's very hard to sort of lead from behind in that scenario. So, but the world's never sort of perfect. And so you sort of have to understand where the carrot and the stick is, right? And sort of work towards that in the best way you can. And so I think the best way to approach that is rising tides raise all ships. If you build the best thing and they can take advantage of it, they will come take advantage of it, right? And it only makes everyone around you better. And that's sort of that initial idea was like, we're not on teams where we're at. I'm building something that every person can take value from as long as they're here to take value from it, right? And so whether you're on that monolithic team or whether you're on a distributed team, set the standard and everyone else will say, man, I want to be part of that because you're doing something awesome. And it will bleed throughout the culture of your business. So it's a question. That's a hard one, to be honest with you. So
Yeah, so when it comes to building valuable, scalable idea, how long do you stick with an idea before you like? There are a lot of ideas that don't quite make it to the cutting floor. How long do you stick with an idea? Try to move on to something else.
yeah. So my process is that as I build it 3 times. And I know that sounds a bit crazy, but I'll build something, I'll just throw it on the paper, 500 lines of SQL, whatever that thing is, and just get it working. And then I'll throw that thing away and say, I've learned some valuable lessons from that. And then I'll build it again. And then I'll take that value and then that's what I UAT on. And I get the feedback from the user about that process. And then I'll say, okay, now I know everything I need to know, what I learned from the customer, the deliverable, and then I'll write it in a day. So I have all of that detail. But you really just need to get in there in the weeds and say, I'm going to knock this out in a day. I'm going to write 500 lines and just get all the detail and errors I can, gather information, chalk that, write a better version of that your customer can look at, UAT, then implement. That's sort of my process. So good question. Anybody else in on the Zoom? Cool.
Might be something. Sounds like these are lessons learned over a long period of time.
Yeah.
And so it almost seems like an ideal. I'm sure you've been in places where this process, this culture was not sure what my question is, but I'm seeing that there's a lot of organizations that don't follow these standards.
100%.
How do you get from that point to another? Many places don't. Am I correct here? I guess that's my question.
No, yeah, you're absolutely right. There's always going to be places where you go and like everything doesn't work out perfect because of the world's sort of a unperfect place, right? So I think focusing on getting to the end goal is always like your stretch goal, right? But you never can expect perfection. That's why sort of along the path you always have to be sort of measuring. That's why I love FP&A. You say, hey, we're not where we need to be today. Those problems that I identified, those are opportunities, but we move the needle this much. And so focusing on just delivering that, and that's why I hate agile, but I do love sprints and sort of focus on driving an output every 2-3 weeks and saying this is what we delivered, because you can just start moving the needle and you don't focus on that bigger picture, which can be discouraging, right? Because you have so many variables and so many issues and people coming and going, and you can't really be focused on the macro. You got to just dial in, solve that problem, move the needle, go to the next one, and not be sort of, hey, let me buy this tool because I think it can solve all my problems. You're living in a fantasy world. If you think that when you buy an Alteryx and you think it's going to solve all your problems, when you buy any tool or when you build any tool, you get to iterate and make it better over time. So focusing on what I can solve today that's going to drive the most value is probably anybody's best bet. That's how I edify my own self every day. I wake up and say, didn't work out like I wanted to yesterday, but I probably should go do that today. Like, so just incremental growth is, sort of the focus instead of like, hey, I'm going to solve all the world's problems. That's sort of grandiose and not realistic, right? So just keeping a level head about it and saying, we moved the needle, we made a difference. So now let's go do that again because we know we can. And you sort of get this snowball effect of momentum, and you get the culture built up, and you build up some perseverance through some of that, and you get some, you learn to be, what's the word I'm looking for? You be confident in yourself that you can deliver within this framework, right? So you're going to take your knocks. I think everyone's going to in life. But just having a framework to know that you can continually tick the needle and have something, the carrot that's out there to chase after will sort of keep you motivated. On a different sort of topic, it's sort of related. I have a 15-year-old that I brought into my home. Who's my brother's daughter, and I'm sort of having to go through the exercise of teaching her to sort of like write her goals down. Good. Like write your goals down for next week, write them down for next month, next year, next 3 years, next 5 years, but learn to come back to those goals and say, I set that as my goal and I did nothing to achieve it. And scratch that off because I realized that wasn't important to me, and being self-aware that it wasn't important to me. I think that's also a good exercise to do in business. If you have these deliverables, you have that long list, how to make it perfect, how to solve the matrix, come back to it in a year and say, we didn't really do that, and now it's not relevant. Let's reorganize, let's reassess. So I oftentimes include sort of a planning phase around budget. So about 6 weeks out of budget season, I'll start looking at that list, reassessing, shifting priorities, POCing things that might solve those problems if I'm buying, or dedicating some dev time to building something that may solve those and doing a POC, and go use that to get budget. But it's always that assessment period, like once a year at least. If you're not doing run rate budgets, or you're doing a yearly, just a yearly budget, you want to have that period of time set aside every year to just say, we're going to reassess and we're going to make sure that we're going to be focused on building good things, because it's really easy to get in there, head down, 500 lines of code in your code editor for 2 weeks straight, and get lost and look up and say we didn't get anything done. And so thinking about that, and not only in that sprint cycle, but on a yearly basis, on a 5-year basis, is a good exercise just to go do, and sort of get a gut check of what you're actually delivering and what you can actually achieve. So
Kind of answered my follow-up. But like, if you're an individual, you have a voice in the data architect, at least some like. As an individual contributor, you're still pushing that same mindset of pushing for excellence.
yeah, you don't, as a leader, you don't get to lose your IC. You're still an individual contributor every day, right? So even when you can become a people leader, you're still an IC as well. So you got to drive the ship with that in mind. So I'm lucky that I get to work in a technical role. I have a couple cloud engineers that work for me. I still get to jump in and write Terraform. I still get to jump in and write SQL. I got to write a Rust web server the other day, which was something I was always kind of curious about, is writing Rust, because we're serving out data to an application that marketing is building. And so just like, I still get to dive in and do those IC things. If I was completely just like non-technical and doing no work, I think I'd get demotivated personally. So self-awareness is very important. And that's what that goal setting does for you. I know this is off topic, but that goal setting will tell you, like, yeah, I wanted to be the CIO one day, but I really love coding, and sort of reassessing, so. Cool.
Last chance. Questions? Yes.
What are some of the strategies that you found useful throughout the years when trying to deal with stakeholders that want to develop that kind of couple, building a solution that's like scalable and stable?
Yeah. That is always the rub, right? They want it now and they don't know what they want, because they sort of have this vision in mind of what they're trying to deliver on. And here's what I'll say is, like, my grandfather was a computer engineer in the Air Force and IBM and Hewlett Packard. He taught me to code. He also taught me a lot of other things. And one of those was, people are always going to ask something of you. Give them the correct answer, give them the tangible answer, and deliver on that answer, and you'll start building trust with them. the next time that person, they might not like it in the moment, the next time that person comes back to you and says, hey, I need this thing, I need it by now, and you tell them, hey, it's gonna be 4 weeks instead of 2, they're gonna give you less tension. There's gonna be less rub there because they trust that you're gonna deliver and build. So I would say be honest in your assessment of how you can build it, sandbag a bit and deliver early, but always just set an expectation and meet it. And then you'll start building rapport with people. Don't be too concerned with I need it now, because I need it now never got anybody anywhere really quickly or delivered much. Again, I go back to that WhatsApp, he didn't get the job and spent months and months and months just pounding sand to build the best possible thing. And it was what everyone wanted. So going slow sometimes is often the better method. Just being honest about that and saying, hey, I don't think that's feasible. We want to build this the right way and delivering on it. That's the sweet spot. So. Anybody else?
Questions?